What is it like when something dear is torn away, something that felt secure, familiar, necessary removed without warning? Perhaps a relationship, a job, status, comfort, a dream. Loss like that punches deep. Pain radiates, questions swirl. Why this? What now? Is there love beyond this removal? Is there purpose still? Listen carefully. Removal is not abandonment. Separation does not equal departure of care. Something removed once has meaning. Something removed once was relied upon. Something removed once had promise. That removal cuts because what existed felt essential to identity, security, future. That removal reveals not weakness, though weakness is exposed. Removal reveals what has been trusted more than the foundation. When what was leaned on is gone, there are seasons: darkness, confusion, shame, regret. Every step forward may feel like betrayal of what once was. Why did that support disappear? Was faith misplaced? Were expectations wrong? The heart, raw and bleeding, demands clarity and justice. Yet clarity often comes in seasons after removal, not before. In that void appears an opportunity, an invitation to see poverty of self, the limits of control. Removal uncovers idols, what was clung to above what truly matters. If time, attention, emotion, hope built around anything less than ultimate truth, removal exposes hollowness. That does not mean removal is deserved punishment. Rather, it means removal serves as surgeon's scalpel, cutting what threatens life. Pain itself is a teacher. In the stillness of what is no more, hearing becomes possible, whispers of truth, as flame reveals what is in soil. In shadows, clarity can grow. What seemed allowance of crawling now urges rising. What seemed permission to settle becomes summons to holiness. When certainty crumbles, the soul is forced to look inward, not for comfort from what was taken, but toward what always abides. Only there is unshakable peace. Only there is unquenchable hope. Whatever is removed cannot take away that which was never exchangeable. Whatever is removed cannot silence ultimate purpose. Consider that removal does not happen at random. Seasons of removal are seasons of refinement. They break attachments that choke growth. They expose roots that refuse truth. They prune branches that draw life from wrong source. The pruning is painful, for pruning always is, but necessary for fruit, for beauty, in that removal. Though raw wounds burn, grace rests. Grace may not soothe immediately. Grace may be hidden at first. But grace waits at the edge of restored vision. Grace whispers, something better is being worked, something more lasting than the loss. Although comfort fled for a moment, constancy has not forsaken. Although direction seemed lost, purpose remains unmoved. Despair whispers that removal is final, that emptiness means no more. But consider dawn. The darkest night precedes it. The heaviest winter births most vibrant spring. What seems ended is often prelude. Even in cracked soil, new seeds germinate, roots deepen, strength builds unseen. Removals often come because a higher calling demands shape unseen to the natural eye. If everything stays, complacency thrives. If everything remains comfortable, walls grow around heart. If everything is secure, dependency turns self, reliance into God. Removal fractures that false idol, leaving heart raw, pliable. So what must one do when something is removed? First, allow grief. Do not rush past pain. Weep, lament, ache. Honest sorrow is pathway to humility. It recalls that control is limited. It opens space for empathy toward others who lost similarly. In that grief, cry out, not to curse the process, but to be honest about the hurt. Ignoring ache delays healing. Next, examine what was the nature of that attachment. Was there dependence beyond what is sustainable? Was security invested where insecurity always lived? Was identity wrapped around fleeting things? Ask. Did love for that removed overshadow love for what cannot be removed? Did hope in that removal become stronghold? Clarity in this examination reveals idols, hidden but strong. Then, surrender, release what is gone. Release the bitterness, the what-ifs, the resentment, the attempts to reverse what cannot be reversed. Surrender not because removal was deserved, but because continuing to clutch what is gone keeps living in prison. Surrender unlocks hands for new giftings, makes room for new beauty, opens arms to restoration. Then, trust, not in what was removed, not even in restoration, but in fidelity, in constancy. That which remains is faithful. Though voices call betrayal, though presence seemed absent, truth holds that seasons fade, but purpose continues. Trust is not blind. It is rooted in what has been known, what cannot be erased. Also, cultivate gratitude. In loss, there remains something to thank for. What once was, what taught, what loved. Gratitude does not deny the wound. Gratitude acknowledges gift, no matter how gift is withdrawn. Gratitude steadies soul when storm rages. Moreover, walk forward. Do not remain stuck in question. Decisions small, step by step. Pursuit of truth. Obedience to what seems next. Faith is active, not passive. Though ground feels unstable, step by step, one learns new footing. Growth is not measured by speed, but by perseverance. Seek community. Share the journey. Let others bear witness. Let others weep with you. Isolation magnifies doubt. Community reminds of shared brokenness and shared grace. In shared pain, healing breathes. In shared hope, vision widens. Also, hold vision of what is ultimate, beyond removal, beyond present frame, beyond what sees. One greater than circumstance has broader plan. Even when removal cuts, what is unseen works. Even when sense rejects, love labors. Even when loss looms, resurrection waits. Resist cheap comfort. Resist voices promising that this removal defined failure. Resist ratio of visible success. Resist measuring value by what remains in one's life at the moment. Do not allow removal to become identity without reason. Identity must be bound in something unremovable. Remember, removal does not equal rejection. Absence of what was does not mean absence of care. The removal often marks season, not sentence. Pain is real, loss is real, but so is possibility. Out of loss emerges refinement, purity, clarity, deeper allegiance. When comforts die, devotion awakens. When securities collapse, dependence realigns. When familiar paths shut, discovery of new ways begins. When limitation comes, creativity surges. When frustration sears, longing intensifies for what is true. Never forget, something removed today could mean something new tomorrow. That which is taken might make space for what is more glorious. That removal may break chains unseen, clean wounds unseen, form character unseen. Even though present sight does not entertain that hope, faith entertains possibility beyond what is seen. So let grief sharpen faith, let sorrow fuel surrender, let loss drive worship deeper, let what is removed become canvas on which mercy paints redemption. Let cold ash bury pride, that from that ash the phoenix of purpose rise, that which is improvised in the heart when loss strikes, faith that remains, love that holds, hope that warms, is the weight of eternity. What is eternal does not depend on possessions, position, affection, comfort. What is eternal is never removed, never diminished. Stand still in that truth when everything else trembles. Hold to what has always been, what cannot be removed. Character refined, courage tested, love given, truth embraced. These cannot be taken. These are treasures stored where rust does not corrupt, moth does not consume, thief cannot steal. When yearning for what was grips, let that yearning redirect toward what always was, is always true. When the mind says why, let the heart say, though not now, always worth. When the soul whispers abandoned, let faith counter, not removed from purpose, removed for purpose. Loss of path may feel like wandering, but wandering may lead to heights unreachable on paved way. Loss of security may feel like fear, but fear sculpted yields deeper longing. Loss of what seemed essential forces reorientation toward what is essential. What cannot be exchanged, what cannot be removed. So rise, not in self-reliance, but in reliance upon that foundation. Rise, not in bitterness, but in gratitude. Rise, not in fleeting comfort, but eternal hope. The pain is real, the absence sharp, yet what remains is more substantial than any loss. What remains is the source of life, unbounded by change, unthreatened by seasons. And finally, believe that removal marks neither end of journey nor cancellation of dreams, but transformation of soul. Believe that the darkest valley is threshold to heights. Believe that when dependence is shattered, soul learns to cling to what is everlasting. Believe that nothing removed can eclipse what endures, what redeems, what resurrects. In that believing, one journeys not as victim of absence, but as heir of promise. One walks in scars, yes, but scars that testify to passage, to grace, to refining fire. One stands not longing for return of what was, but pressing for fulfillment of what always is. Trust the process, embrace the pain, let removal do what it must. Break illusions, kindle longing, shape character, widen hope. For out of absence emerges presence, out of death blooms life. Out of removal is birth of something far more lasting, far more deep, far more true. What is taken away often creates space for deeper faith, greater purpose, and a more authentic walk rooted not in comfort or clarity, but in surrender, obedience, and enduring hope. There is a strange sweetness in realizing that something precious, something familiar, has disappeared, and not by your choice. It jolts you awake. It breaks the veneer of security you so proudly carried. When what was once firm gives way, when the ground beneath you seems to vanish, you stand exposed. Pain flares, doubt seizes your senses. A rush of questions, was I wrong? Was my trust misplaced? Was that thing so necessary that without it, I'm nothing? But what if removal is not punishment, but a craft of refinement? What if that tearing away is actually part of shaping a purer form, an undistracted life, a soul more attuned to what cannot be taken? When what you leaned on is stripped, the core of who you are becomes exposed. Weaknesses, longings, fears. It forces you to reckon with what you thought indispensable. It forces you to confront dependencies that masqueraded as needs. It forces you to see that what you built your identity around may have been shifting sand, because refinement begins when all that is removable is removed. Removal reveals what is false. It shows the myths you believed about safety, about love, about value. You see that comfort, status, affirmation, approval, security, these are gifts, yes, but fragile ones. What of the inner trust? What of the confidence that dwells in what cannot be shaken? What of the belief that your worth does not depend on what you have, what you perform, what people think of you, what remains in your life? Removal cuts. It exposes idols, not always the blatantly known ones, but the subtle, secret ones. The idol of identity tied to achievement, the idol of dependency on relationship, the idol of possibility that everything will go according to plan. When those are gone, when the prop breaks, where do you stand? Do you crumble, or do you cling to what is immutable? Refinement hurts because it requires loss. A saw does not mark without slicing. Fire does not purify gold without heat. Pain is the instrument. The more deeply you loved what is removed, the sharper the loss. But in that pain, you begin to see that dependency is a liability, not in the sense that dependency on good things is wrong, but dependency on anything less than ultimate fidelity is dangerous. When you are dependent on something removable for your stability, your peace, your identity, you are vulnerable to collapse the moment removal comes. So refinement is not mere loss, it is recalibration. It is repositioning your heart's compass from the transient toward the eternal. It is learning to trust not in the constancy of circumstance, but in the constancy of character. Character of what endures, what is beyond flavor of moment, what transcends need and change. Refinement is also exposure. The weak soil beneath roots becomes evident when storms blow. What was shallow shows itself. What was built on convenience reveals its hollow core. When the support is gone, when the comfort departs, when the applause ceases, you are left with yourself, stripped of props. That's terrifying. Yet in that terror, you arrive at truth. The truth that nothing you have, nothing you hold, nothing you cling to, can replace the worth that was never given in those temporary things. There is also a refining in humility. Loss folds you into yourself. It makes you small, alone, asking. Helpless in ways you never wished to be, you see your utter dependence. Not dependence on people or position, but on something greater than all removals. The shrinking of everything else magnifies what remains. Your need becomes visible, your condition naked, and that nakedness, though raw, is ground for humility, for honesty, for real trust. In the fire of refinement, passions reorient. That which once consumed your mind, your longing, your plans, if removable, begins to lose its grip. If you could imagine life with it, then living without it becomes excruciating, but possible. Over time, you discover that the craving for permanence in removal was vain. The longing for safety in the perishable was cursed to fail. Introducing the painful but liberating truth. Your deepest desires were meant for that which cannot fade. The flame within you was designed for something unshakable. There's also clarity that comes, clarity of purpose, clarity of identity, clarity of what is essential. When the noise falls away, what remains are echoes of truth. Without the distractions, you find what you truly love, what you're made for. You find the purpose that transcends loss. You find identity not in what you had, but in what you are at the root of your being. You find gospel truth that your value is not measured by circumstance, that your destiny is not tied to what can be removed, that your place is not in what was, but in what is eternally certain. In refining, there's also patience learned. Loss forces slowing down. In the absence of old security, you cannot rush ahead relying on familiar steps. You are forced to wait, to learn obedience, to listen for step-by-step leading. You cannot build by sight alone. Removal makes you walk by faith, not by what you can see, not by what feels safe, but by what promises life beyond what sight offers. Refinement reshapes passions. What was about comfort becomes about conviction. What was about recognition becomes hunger for truth. What was about avoid pain becomes willingness to endure it for deeper joy. The soul learns that what is lasting is not smooth, not always pleasant, but substantial. It learns to value depth over ease, growth over approval, character over pleasure. One of the biggest lies removal confronts is the assumption that prosperity equals blessing, that comfort equals favor. When the removed things include what people praised, What society applauded, what felt like success, your heart must answer. Am I loyal to applause, or am I loyal to what is true? When everything visible withdraws, will loyalty remain? Refinement tests that. It purifies conviction from popularity. It strips away religion of convenience and forces religion of authenticity. What about faith? Refinement, when removal comes, is not about doubting faith. It's about testing faith. Like gold tested in furnace, faith proves genuine when what was placed in it is stripped away. If faith anchored in possessions or status dissolves when those go, that faith was never deep. If faith anchored in relation, in self, in approval, in achievement fails, the fire reveals the gold underneath, or exposes the dross. So removal is gift in that sense, the test that proves what remains. There is sorrow, yes, remorse, regret, longing, but sorrow does not invalidate refinement. It is part of it. Allowing sorrow is fidelity to the wound. It is acknowledgement that something precious once was. But sorrow must never become permanent. Grief must carve space in the heart, but not forever hold dominion. For if sorrow becomes the identity, you never move beyond what was removed. Refinement demands movement, movement of heart, movement toward what was never removed, movement toward what is abiding. In the midst of removal there is still love, perhaps more quiet, less loud, perhaps less visible, less applauded. But love deeper, when what defined life falls away, love remains the soil in which the soul regathers. Love that is not owned, not controlled, not manipulated. Love that persists when conditions change. Love that was never dependent on approval or presence or outcome. That love, once awakened, becomes source of strength deeper than any loss. Refinement also sharpens vision of eternity. When what is here is removed, what is beyond grows more real. The temporal loses its tyranny when you see beyond it. The eternal promise outlives every removal. Every loss is temporary. Every departure has a purpose in the tapestry of something infinite. When what was removed was something beautiful, its memory pulses with longing, but that longing points beyond itself towards something even more beautiful, something permanent. There is a refining of dependency too. Not dependency on things, people, comfort, recognition, but dependency on what cannot be removed, unchanging truth, constant faithfulness, unbreakable promise, ultimatums of mercy. True dependency blooms when everything else collapses. Dependency that does not demand return on investment, that does not expect security of outcome, but trusts presence beyond presence. That kind of dependency is refined through removal. Also, removal teaches endurance. To endure in absence, to persevere when support seems gone, to stand when encouragement ceases, to walk when direction is unclear. Endurance becomes muscle. It is built through these painful intervals. And when the interval is long, you learn perseverance, you learn faithfulness. Endurance does not make suffering smaller, but it builds capacity to carry truth deeper. It builds fortitude. The refining process also humbles ambition. Not in destroying hope, but in recalibrating what you long for. You once thought to build big, to be seen, to matter by measure of what you have. Removal redirects ambition toward faithfulness, integrity, unseen submission. Ambition becomes less noisy, less concerned with applause. It becomes quieter, more aligned with what lasts. The aims shift from fame or acceptance to truth and obedience. Refinement through removal reveals character. Not character that looks good in light, but character that remains when lights go out. Kindness still shown in darkness. Faith still held when storm rages. Love still given when lack abounds. Integrity still lived when no one watches. Removal often removes witness, removes visibility. It tests what you are when there is no audience, and that test reveals what you are made of. Then there is healing. Slow, stubborn, patient healing. The refining process does not skip healing. It may not look like what you expect. It may not feel like restoration of what was, but healing works deeper. It is formation of soul into capacity to bear more, to love more purely, to hope more fully, to appreciate beauty even in less. Only healed scars hold meaning, not bitterness. Whenever the removed thing was once your anchor, your security, your identity, your dream, its removal can shatter, but in that shattering, the beauty of mosaic begins. Broken pieces laid out, joined by something stronger, something unseen, something that binds so well that brokenness becomes testimony of artistry. The holes made by removal, instead of becoming empty voids, become places where grace settles deepest. Refinement is patient. It does not rearrange overnight. It holds space for week after week, for night after night, for doubts, for tears, for fears. It does not demand facade of strength. It whispers conviction, remain faithful, wait, lean not on what was removed, but on what remains. Even when seeing feels like failure, when circumstances mock hope, the refined soul still keeps gaze fixed on what cannot be removed. There comes a reckoning. What if everything you valued came from what could be taken away? What if your sense of peace depended on relationships, position, reputation, things subject to change? Then every moment existed under threat. That fear, that anxiety, that hiding behind facades. Refinement demands exposure of those fears. In removal, those fears come forward, and the refined heart must face them, release them, surrender them, let the truth claim its place. In removal, there is also redirection. Something once walked beside you is gone. Path shifts. The removal is not always random. Even when it feels unfair, even when the loss seems cruel, sometimes what was removed was preventing growth, preventing deeper obedience, preventing entire surrender. The weight you carried, intentionally or not, may have hindered journey. Removal makes way, opens door, clears obstacle, forces stepping toward new terrain that fears would not let you enter. The refined life carries scars. Scars that will always remind, but scars that tell not only of loss, but of survival, of endurance, of faithfulness. Scars that whisper truth in quiet hours. I was held when I had nothing else. Scars that become part of story, part of testifying. Refinement shapes passion for truth above comfort, for justice above convenience, for holiness above popularity. When what matters is not what the world values, but what truth requires. When sacrifice is not a concept, but a lived reality. The refined soul prefers truth even when it costs, even when it isolates, even when it is misunderstood, because what is eternal demands allegiance beyond comfort. The refining process is subtle in its battles, resisting bitterness, resisting resentment, resisting regret. Those are embers that threaten to kindle destructive fires, but refinement calls to burn what is harmful in your own heart, not to lash out, not to collapse into self-loathing, but to purify motives, to purify affections, to learn to forgive, to release blame. To see that holding on beyond what is good only perpetuates bondage, only release creates freedom. When what you lose was source of identity, meaning, purpose, you may feel defeated, forgotten. But refinement teaches that defeat is not the final word. That being forgotten by some does not mean being forsaken by what cannot be removed. That your value is not in what remains, but in who you are beneath what remains and what is taken. That your foundational worth is bound in that which cannot vanish in removal, in that which holds together when everything else falls apart. Refinement is about being conformed not to comfort, but to truth. It is about submission not to what you planned, but to what is beyond planning. It is about surrendering scripts, letting go of expectations, releasing what you thought life would look like, in order to see what life might be when shaped not by your hands, but by the power that cannot be removed. It is in the cold absence of what was that faith becomes sharpened. When the familiar voice is silent, when the visible signs recede, faith learns to speak louder, to hold the promise that what is invisible is greater, to trust in what has been promised even when present feelings contradict it. Faith becomes trust not rooted in feeling or circumstance, but in character that is unmoved by removal. There is also deepening of longing. Loss creates craving, not for restoration of former things necessarily, but for what is ultimate, for fulfillment of purpose, for communion that does not depend on what can depart, for peace that is not contingent on applause, on success, on comfort. That longing becomes fuel, that longing becomes compass. Refinement is never wasted. What is removed shapes you. The absence teaches. The trial refines. The refining life is not polished by ease, but tempered in adversity. It becomes testimony, a life that though tested, though stripped, though bereft of many things, still shines with something greater, still displays strength, still declares hope, still bears love, still presses on. In that journey, you discover that what remains is more precious than anything removed, that what remains when everything else fades is what really mattered. That permanent mercy, unchanging love, faithful promise, character that endures, the things that cannot be taken, are what you were always meant to rely upon, always meant to build upon, always meant to cherish. So when removal comes, not as enemy but as instrument, let its sharpness awaken something holy. Let its emptiness invite fullness in what is never absent. Let its breaking give birth to something more whole, more steady, more grounded in what is true, what endures, what cannot be removed. When something is lost, when the familiar falls away, it feels like an ending. The heart contracts. Fear whispers that nothing will ever be as before. Comfort, identity, hope, all seem fractured, yet loss is not the end. Loss is a crucible, not a tomb. It is the place where transformation begins, arduous, painful, but profound. The fabric of what was comfortable unravels, and in that unraveling, something unseen begins to stitch new patterns. What was loss becomes the womb of a deeper life. At first, loss paralyzes. The mind replays. What if I had done differently? What if I had held on more tightly? What if I had seen the signs sooner? Regret claws. Self-blame, shame, sorrow, these are the first companions. Sleeping becomes difficult, waking heavier. The body is shocked, the soul sinks into questions. What purpose now? Where do I find meaning when what anchored me is gone? In that, there is a kind of death. Death of expectations, of illusions, of parts of self that were wrapped up in something now vanished. But death, even as terrifying as it is, makes possible resurrection. And transformation always follows loss, though it may take time. When what was familiar is stripped away, there is space, a wilderness opens. In the waste of what is no longer there, roots can dig. Where voices once told you who to be or what mattered, silence now invites a different voice. Where the map you carried no longer guides, you are forced to walk by faith, not by sight. Transformation shifts everything. Pain is the catalyst. It reveals what was superficial, what was held too lightly, what was invested more than it could bear. In the dark soil of absence, truth germinates, the truth about who you are beneath what you had, not the story you told yourself when everything was going right, who you are when stripped, the core of character, of heart, of purpose emerges. You see attachments you never knew were tethering you. You discover idols, not always the boisterous ones, but the quiet ones: comfort, recognition, control, identity as success. Loss exposes their shadow. Transformation removes their power. This process is often slow. There are seasons of doubt, of wandering, of longing. Some mornings it feels like no progress has been made. Nights are thick with emptiness. You may be tempted to fake it, to pretend that everything is okay, that the wound does not fester. But authentic transformation demands honesty. It requires embracing the void, feeling the ache, naming the loss. The wound, raw as it is, must be acknowledged. Without that, any transformation will be superficial, brittle, a facade that cracks under pressure. As days pass, something hardens inside you, not defense, but resilience. A deeper wisdom grows, a strength that cannot be measured by external success. The soul learns that though loss brings darkness, it also reveals capacity. For endurance, for trust, for surrender, for faith. You begin to understand that transformation is not about getting back what you had. It is about gaining what you couldn't have if you held only ever to what was familiar. You gain clarity of what truly matters. You learn to treasure what cannot be lost: integrity, love, compassion, courage, truth. Transformation demands surrender, not the kind of surrender that resigns in despair, but the kind that yields what you cannot control in order to live in what you cannot see. Letting go of what was once essential feels like death, because in many ways a part of you dies. Part of your identity, part of your story, part of your hope may fall, but in that death seeds are planted. As you yield, as you release, as you allow things to be stripped, you become available for something new, something you never would have chosen, perhaps, but something more fitting your true self, more aligned with what deeper purpose calls you toward. There is an education in transformation. You learn patience, learning that recovery, growth, character do not rush. They are slow work. A mountain does not rise overnight. Stones are laid, weathered, tested. You learn humility. Loss breaks pride. When the stage is gone, the applause ceases, the audience departs. You realize your performance mattered little compared to what is spoken in hidden places. You learn compassion, having known loss and absence. You see others with gentler eyes. You understand the weight of silence. You weep more freely. You stand with broken people because you know the territory. In that transformation you also wrestle. You wrestle with questions. Where is purpose now? Will I ever feel whole? Will what has been taken ever be restored? Sometimes answers do not come readily. There are nights of wrestling where faith is small, hope flickers dimly. But transformation thrives in those moments, when you decide to stay even when you do not see, when you refuse bitterness, when you persist in seeking truth even in the dark, because light is often born of darkest places. You may see life differently. The values you once held as highest may shift. The goals you once chased may lose appeal. What once seemed essential may be revealed as distraction. What once felt like success may be recognized as shallow. Transformation reorders priorities. It turns your gaze from accumulation toward being, from possessing toward giving, from receiving toward offering, from success as defined by culture toward faithfulness as defined by the deepest truth. Part of this transformation is trust, not only trust in outcomes or restoration, but trust in the unseeable, trust in character that holds, trust in purpose beyond immediate clarity. You begin to believe that though what you lost was painful, the loss is not arbitrary, that what is unseen is more real than what you see, that the ultimate horizon is not the horizon you once thought. Often, in the process, new dreams arise, dreams not born of ambition, but longing, longing for healing. Longing for relationship healed or made new, for compassion deeper, for quiet peace. But these dreams are different. They may be smaller in the world's eyes, but they are truer in the soul's. They may ask less of prominence, but more of obedience. They may ask less of applause, but more of sacrifice. They may ask less of certainty, but more of faith. Transformation carries cost. Loss demands tears. Loss demands letting go. Loss demands admitting wrong assumptions, letting relationships go, walking away from dreams, accepting that the version of yourself you thought was permanent must change. You may have to move through seasons of emptiness, of disorientation, of pain, of silence. That cost is real, but the cost pays dividends in the depth of your trust, in the clarity of your values, in the steadiness of your hope. In transformation, there is healing, not always complete restoration of what was lost, but restoration of what was broken. Soul wounded by loss can awaken to compassion. Pain can refine empathy. Heart battered by absence can bend toward love. Kindness becomes more real because it flows from someone who has suffered. Strength becomes more gracious because it is tempered by weakness. Joy becomes more rooted, not in what is new or visible, but in what is constant. Peace comes not from absence of storm, but presence of innate alignment with what cannot be shaken. As you walk this road, you begin to see that transformation is paradoxical. In losing you find, in dying you rise, in surrendering you gain, in emptiness you are filled. What is broken becomes canvas. What is void becomes space. What is removed becomes invitation. The place where you once felt utterly defeated becomes altar of growth. The absence once so painful becomes doorway of something unseen but more enduring. You begin to develop a new language, the vocabulary of brokenness, of longing, of trust. You speak less of what you have lost and more of what you believe. You name what cannot be taken: value, love, mercy, truth, faithfulness. You measure life not by what is gained in seasons of plenty, but by what abides in seasons of loss. You find that purpose is not in comfort, but in faithfulness, not in applause, but in integrity, not in recognition, but in obedience. Other people begin to notice change, though maybe not what they expected. They may have known you in conditions, in role, in identity built around what was lost. They may resist the change, or they may celebrate. But transformation rarely fits previous molds. It tends to look strange to those who only knew what was before. There is humility in that. You're no longer called to live up to others' expectations, but to truth. You find belonging not in being understood, but in being authentic. Through transformation, hope becomes more robust. Before loss, hope may have rested heavily on comfort, circumstances, plan A. After loss, hope begins to root in something else, what remains when everything else is stripped. When you know that no matter what else departs, there is a faithful presence, unchanging purpose. Hope that does not collapse when the world shifts. Hope that is not naive, but tested. Hope that emerges not from what is expected, but from what has been experienced, that you have endured, that you have been shaped, that you have discovered something deep in cost. Loss also compels gratitude, not because what was lost was meaningless, but because it taught, because it was once real, because it bore beauty. Gratitude emerges in recalling what was good even if it is gone. Gratitude in the memory, gratitude in the lessons, gratitude in the love once shared, gratitude for what you had, and gratitude for what you did not yet see. That gratitude softens bitterness. Gratitude anchors the heart when the winds of regret blow. Transformation shapes service. Because you've known loss, you are less likely to judge those who suffer. You are more generous with patience, with mercy. You reach out, perhaps, to those who are broken in ways you once were. You speak truth in shadows because you've walked through them. You carry hope into places where others have despaired. Your scars become maps, guiding those who are lost. Your endurance becomes light, not because pain glorified you, but because love held you. One of the hardest parts, acceptance. Accepting that restoration may never mean return, that some things lost are lost forever. But acceptance does not equal settling for less nor forgetting. It equals recognizing that some stories are never restored in kind, but they may be restored in meaning. That some doors once closed do not reopen, but new doors open. That a sunset vanishes not to erase sky, but to usher in stars. Transformation, therefore, is not optional for those who lose. It is inevitable. Either you allow loss to harden you into bitterness, cynicism, stoicism, resigned numbness, or you allow it to soften you, open you, shape you into someone more awake. One path leads to bitterness, the other to beauty. One to isolation, the other to solidarity. One to defensiveness, the other to vulnerability. One to despair, the other to hope. And so you learn to live in tension between what was and what is, between grief and gratitude, between longing for restoration and embracing the journey, between remembering what was lost and welcoming what is unfolding. You do not avoid the pain, you do not rush the process, you do not pretend nothing happened, you lean into the discomfort, letting it mold, let it chisel out the trivial, the superficial, the self-dependent. In that process, something immutable is born, inner maturity. You see that maturity is not maturity of success, but maturity of character. It is not measured by possessions, status, recognition, but by faithfulness in weakness, kindness in suffering, persistence in absence. It is when your heart no longer demands guarantees, but rests in promise, when your identity is no longer tied to what the world sees, but to what endures beyond sight, when your soul is less defined by outcomes and more by allegiance to truth. Transformation also yields freedom, freedom from fear of loss because you've known loss, freedom from needing to control, freedom from performing, freedom from defining your value by what you have, freedom from putting hopes in what may vanish, freedom from measuring love by return. In the loss, you stop depending on flimsy supports and begin to rest in a firmer foundation. You begin to see loss not as punishment, not as my curse, but as teacher, companion, instrument. Loss begins to feel less like enemy and more like necessary companion. Loss shapes you, loss gives, loss refines, not always what you wanted, but often what you needed, not always comfortable, but often essential. Even as transformation matures, wounds may still ache, memories may still sting, there may always remain places tender, but those places no longer have to define you. They no longer have to have the final word. They become part of story, wounded, yes, but witness. Those scars are not shame, they are testimony. They speak of endurance, they speak of grace, they speak of depths reached, of faith stretched, of hope that held. And over time, looking back, you may see that the tapestry woven is richer for the loss than if that loss had never come. You may see threads you never would have known were in you. Compassion, patience, quiet strength, deeper dependence on that which never fails. You may see beauty in what was once unbearable. Seeds planted at great cost blossom in seasons you perhaps never expected. Loss is never comfortable, it is never easy, it is never something wished, but it is fertile. It is transforming. What was lost is real, but what is being formed is real too. What the world may see as end, you come to understand as metamorphosis. The caterpillars fall, the cocoons silence, the emergence overhead. Loss is not the end. It is the painful, glorious path by which something new and more alive takes shape.